Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's event on the green transition and the role of ICT. My name is Anja Ingenried. I'm the head of office for Deutsche Telekom in Brussels, but today I'm the moderator of this debate and I'm very happy to guide you through the next 90 minutes. The Green Deal is one of the top priorities of President Ursula von der Leyen's Commission, and the digital and green twin transitions are regarded as key for the post-COVID recovery in the EU. We are entering a phase now in which the ambitious Green Deal targets will be translated into concrete action. Politico warned already that a legislative tsunami is coming. On Wednesday, the Commission will propose the Fit for 55 package that is supposed to adapt all climate relevant legislation to the new CO2 reduction targets for 2030, or as Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans put it, Fit for 55 will align our laws with our ambition. But before we dive into the details during the panel debate, I would like to give the floor to Birgit Klesper. She's a Senior Vice President, Group Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at Deutsche Telekom, and she will give us a short introduction to what Deutsche Telekom is doing to contribute to the Green Deal targets. The floor is yours, Birgit.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome as well from my side. Of course, Telekom has supported the ambitious climate agenda of the EU Emission Commission from the start, because without digital transformation, there will be no climate neutrality. We are ready to contribute and to push ahead with the necessary restructuring of the economy and our company. And we have included sustainability in all our activities. And as you can see from my first slide, as well, of course, it is incorporated into our corporate strategy. So the first layer, this is about business. We want to grow, lead in customer experience, lead in technology and in business productivity. And the second and the third layer is how we want to do it. And there you see two little words, which is act responsibly. Even these are only two words. Behind that, there is hiding a whole bouquet of activities. And we cluster it, as you see on the next slide, under two umbrellas. One is green magenta, and the other one is good magenta. Of course, my topic today is green magenta. And it's not that we want to have the best network, but that we want really to look into our own footprint and become step by step a real green company. But it's not only about our own footprint, it is as well about the enabling potential that we have as an industry. I give you one figure. We are enabling through the use of our products and solutions 7.1 times more CO2 reduction in emissions at our customers than we are emitting ourselves. And of course, we looked, and you see that on the next slide, into our own climate protection strategy. This is, by the way, not the first one. It is already the fourth one. And there you see that by 25, we want to become net zero in our own activities, meaning scope 1 and scope 2. The big lever is to have, since this year, in the whole group, and you might know that our footprint is mainly Europe and the US, renewable electricity and only renewable electricity in our group. Last year, we already had that for Germany. And our target from net zero in 2040, scope 1, 2, and 3, is that we want to become net zero by 2040. And we have an interim target, which is a reduction of the emissions in the value chain per customer by 25% in 2030. By the way, we still have an actual target, which was on the basis of 2008 to 2020 to save 20% of CO2 emissions. We reached 64% of reduction due to not only using renewable energy, but really working on our energy footprint and reducing energy consumption, despite growing infrastructure. The whole CO2 targets are supported by what we call, and you see it on the next page, Green Magenta program. The Green Magenta program is a program that is looking into climate change, but as well implementing resource efficiency in 10 dedicated work streams. For example, how can we become more green when it comes to our point of sales in the telecom shops? How can we develop more green offers and solutions to our customers? We are looking into sustainable product packaging and avoiding paper, reducing plastic to zero. We are looking into circular DT network and IT infrastructure as well into our own building, to our own mobility. In this program, there are more than 500 people involved only in Germany, and another huge amount of people when it comes to the EU. We are rolling out this program outside of Germany in the whole EU footprint that we have. And we are supported by a voluntary community, which is called Green Pioneers. And I want to give you one example, which you see on the next page, what we are looking into, and one result: less is sometimes more. Here you see one of our products. It's a Speedport WLAN router, and the housing is made out of 90% of recycled plastic. There are no critical substances anymore in there. We use alternative materials like, for example, potato starch, not eatable, but biological reducing. And we have no unnecessary additional material anymore, which is not used. And as well, we look at the packaging, very important. The packaging is 100% environmental friendly. It is 100% plastic free. It's recyclable, biodegradable materials, non-toxic labeling. The printing is, for example, soya ink. And the ratio of the packaging, you don't get a package like this and then you have a product like this. We look into the ratio that this really fits together. And by this, we set targets, of course, in all our activities. Just the targets, for example, for packaging, all new T-branded devices from now on will be sustainably packaged. And we are working with our suppliers, and by latest 23, we want to have 100% sustainable packages as well by our suppliers, Samsung, TCL, Apple, and so on. Not an easy task, but we are already joining forces, which you see on the next page. We are joining forces as well with our competitors. Here you see our eco rating. We work together with Orange, Telefonica, Telia, and Vodafone on a uniform and industry-wide eco rating methodology for mobile devices. This is to display the ecological performance of mobile phones, to give orientation for purchasing decisions for the customer, but as well, of course, to push the suppliers in working on their environmental footprint. We introduced that just in May in 24 European countries together. And following a detailed assessment, each mobile phone receives an overall rating of 100 points of environmental performance over its entire life cycle: production, use phase, and of course, end of life cycle. And on top, we are giving a performance score on 5 key elements, which is durability, repairability, recyclability, climate, and resource efficiency. We start small, but start. We have 12 suppliers like Samsung, Nokia, and others already working with us. And now we are working on getting more suppliers in it. And as well, we have already 5 further European telcos who are interested in joining. So working on our footprint alone, as I said, and this is my last little slide that I wanted to share with you, is the one part. But of course, we try to push and work together on climate and resource targets with our partners, with our suppliers. And we are not only working on a transparency on the CO2 footprint and energy efficiency and packaging, as you have seen, and materials, but of course, even though this is not our topic today, We are looking into the fair labor and living conditions. And of course, we are looking into a sustainable supply chain management. So in a nutshell, we are really trying to work on climate protection and strategy and reduce our footprint and to reduce our footprint when it comes to resources and become most efficient. But at the same time, as I said, we are an enabler and we are offering quite a variety of smart solutions to reduce CO2 emissions as well in other industries. Thank you for your attention. This was a quick run through some of the major topics that we are running at DT.
Thank you very much, Birgit. And let me introduce our next speaker, Björn Sören Giegler. He is a Senior Digital Innovation Officer at DG Connect. He's an expert on disruptive technologies and has worked for the European Investment and the World Bank. And he teaches still as a visiting professor for political economy at Georgetown University. He will talk about the enabling role of digital for the green transformation. So the floor is yours, Sören.
Well, Anja, thank you so much for inviting me to this fascinating panel. So the first thing I wanted to say, this is not a new topic. Believe it or not, right? We have talked about this in the 90s. I participated at UN summits in the mid-90s. So their first statements, not new, but then something is completely new. So what has been new is, of course, COVID-19 has shown to the world, has demonstrated that digital is not optional anymore. It's required in all aspects of our lives. Digital has become an integral part, and that is really completely different than before. So that I think is essential. The second key on the first slide, we'll see digital as an enabler. But what is critical is really to bringing these two worlds together, digital and sustainability, because many times experts actually are either sustainability experts or you have digital specialists. But they used to, in the 90s, they barely talked to each other. A lot of people really working on climate action were actually opposed heavily to digital development. And be quite frank, us working more on digital, we're also more like, suspicious or critical of some of our colleagues working on climate change. And I think it's very important to bring these two worlds together. The second issue here on this first slide, you will see this is cross-cutting. So it's not energy sector. It's not sufficient. So much of the debate has covered, has discussed the use of blockchain or Bitcoin, very high energy consumption of data centers. But digital is much more. It's a cross-sectorial topic, which goes through all sectors. And so, for instance, there are huge potentials of reducing CO2s in the agriculture sector. Agriculture is actually a key sector being responsible for important CO2 emissions. E-mobility, smart buildings, green data centers. So, and it is not only about production. It's about production and consumption. So everyone has the UN calls it a multi-stakeholder approach. But what does it actually mean in practice? We have the industry, we have the SMEs, startups, and then we have citizens and all of us as individuals. So it requires a behavior change. And digital can, in fact, be a lever for this behavior change, also provide incentives. So on the slide, what you see here, so 5 to 9% electricity use of the digital sector. Some studies say that it can go up to 14% by 2040. So it's a serious issue we have to address proactively. But on the other hand, digital can be a really important enabler and reducing CO2 emissions between 15 and 20%. And here we really want to emphasize a lot. So next slide, please. So intersection between green and digital transformation. As I just tried to emphasize before, we have to come these two thoughts together. It's not going to work well if we continue to work in silos. It has to be truly a holistic approach and leveraging and learning from each other. That's why the initiative Digital with a Purpose. We have to give digital a purpose. It's not, I mean, quite frankly, a lot of our digital tools have been very effectively used for efficiency gains, Industry 4.0, for about productivity gains, for profits, right? I mean, if you look today at the top 10 highest values companies in the world, I think I've had the last numbers, 6, 7 are definitely digital. But we have to now give it a meaningful purpose in terms of sustainability. And here, a radical new thinking of business models is required. It's an opportunity. It's especially an opportunity for us also here in Europe, because that's how we can differentiate ourselves from global competitors, such as China and also North America. We have the challenge that we have excellent science, but how do we get our innovations from the lab to the market? So we have this commercialization gap. So while we invent, we are great inventors, a lot of our patents are being used by, purchased by literally the US, so also increasingly China. And we face two valleys of death. So basically the early stage and then the growth financing. So how do we scale up? Next slide, please. So sustainable digital technology. So that we have basically two core focus in the Commission. First is greening ICTs. So making ICT sector more sustainable. And the second then is digital for green or digital for climate action. So the climate neutrality, high energy efficiency. So we are supporting the circular economy, circular electronics initiative. We have a specific new program on the EPI, European Processor Initiative, which we're very excited about, because this is a new processor, European processor, which actually will be highly energy efficient. And then the climate neutrality of all the networks, 5G, has a huge potential to support this and to reduce the carbon footprint of the digital sector. And not just a discussion about Bitcoin, has really emphasized that this is important. And it's not just sufficient to purchase, like Tesla, very few people know that the biggest revenue of Tesla comes from the compensation. Yeah. So basically it's not even the sales of cars. No, it's about everybody purchasing the carbon market and people purchasing the rights to pollute from Tesla. So the next slide, please. Then digital contribution to the environment and climate. So we work a lot on the digital product passport. So blockchain, for instance, has a tremendous potential to really track and measure for the first time from the farmer, say, to the fork. If you, like the ambition would be, imagine you would be in your grocery store, okay? You buy organic products, fine. But then you could also buy products that are CO2, have very low CO2 carbon print. And you imagine you could use your cell phone to actually zoom over the product and see how much CO2 was emitted in this product. So would you still then purchase, say, mineral water from the Fijis? Would you still purchase, is it really necessary to, I mean, it is also a call for action for all of us, for the citizens, for the consumer, to be more conscious of what we consume, because the production alone will not address climate challenge. And here digital has a lot of potential. The second thing we thought, in many countries, there are incentives for people to commute. You get actually a tax break, for commuters, but there's no tax break yet in place for environmentally friendly behavior. So concretely, if you take your bike to work, you could imagine you get a tokenized economy through blockchain, and you get an immediate reward. I discussed this with my son and the European school. The young people love this because, you know, they had a lot of decisions to make. So do they now take the bus? Do they go by train? And if they would get a reward enabled actually through an app and digital technology, that could make real difference. So let's go to the next, please. Next slide on the Green Digital Transformation Declaration. So we work with the member states. So we have been getting the support from all member states. So far, 24 EU member states and Norway have officially signed on to the Green Digital Transformation Declaration, committed themselves to actually investing more in green digital technologies, achieving climate neutrality, and putting policies in place, regulatory frameworks, government policies that make it much more easy for the sector to develop those tools and to adapt them and to use them. And that is a key step. So the next slide, please. So now the role of you and others, the private sector, yeah, Deutsche Telekom, but all telecom companies can make a very important contribution. And we're very pleased that you're a member of our European Green Digital Coalition among 30. So we have 30 CEOs. So there are many of the Vodafone, Ericsson, Nokia, Microsoft, all signed on to basically this European Green Digital Coalition. What will it do concretely? It does commit the companies to become carbon neutral. And then very importantly, put in place a methodology and tools to actually measure that and to verify it. So we work now with the European Parliament on this European Parliament pilot program, because right now we've worked a lot with ITU and others and GESI as well, but it's very difficult still to have a methodology in place that measures the impact of digital as an enabler. So, and how can you then verify whether that's in fact the case? So under all circumstances, be frank, we want to avoid greenwashing. And for that, a rigorous methodology is very important that basically can be verified also by independent experts. Next slide, please. So here you see the members so far, the European Green Digital Coalition, but we also work now increasingly with SMEs and also startups. So for instance, there's a group Leaders for Climate Action and the European SME Alliance. And that's important. So I'm almost finished, sorry, a little bit too long, but the next slide, please, this is my most important topic, actually. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my talk is we do not invest enough in Europe in digital clean tech. There's a 19 billion market globally for clean tech. However, we only invest currently between 3 and 4 billion. So while climate change and sustainability is so high on the agenda, the investments are not yet there. So that's why we have launched through our Commissioner Thierry Breton has launched the Digital Clean Tech Investment Initiative in mid-March. What is it? It's a specific dedicated program to support the development of digital clean tech solutions. Because why is this needed? Because the experts of the UN and the global community tell us that with our current technologies, we will not meet the climate change goals. We need to invest more in innovation. We need to more be creative. We need the startup community and SMEs to develop these technologies. And these are high risk. Yeah, these are high risk. They're double risk. The first, they are basically in digital, which is already innovative and risky. And then second, clean tech is very different than apps or software. It takes like 3, 4, 5 years to develop. It has much longer time spans to be developed, and therefore people who work on clean tech have very hard time raising the necessary equity, and that's why we launched this program. Next slide, please. So here, this is under the InvestEU. So here, this is the major investment program of the European Commission. And here we want to pool resources between the European Commission, member states, and the international financial institutions, and actually national promotional banks. So for instance, we've been in conversation, of course, with BPI France, with KfW. So this is what sometimes in the German political debate is called an Airbus for KI, for artificial intelligence. Sorry. We would need a real European initiative for sustainability and clean tech. And then my last slide. So basically, this is rounds up my presentation. But if I want to emphasize one thing is, we need to form a coalition between the different actors, between the private sector, the startups, the academics, and citizens, and to come together in really taking this seriously and moving from digital being a potential to actually realizing the potential of digital for climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this inspiring keynote. That gives us a lot of food for thought for our debate now. And without further ado, I would like to introduce today's panelists. First of all, Vincent Birotteau. He is a head of unit at DG Energy, responsible for research, innovation, digitalization, and competitiveness. He has a PhD in building science and has worked extensively in various roles on energy issues. Then Markus Ferber, he's a member of the European Parliament. He's a coordinator of the European People's Party for the Econ Committee and a substitute member in the Committee on Transport and Tourism, TRAN. And in addition, he acts as a president of the Hans Seidel Foundation. He's an engineer by training and comes from a region in Germany where a lot of companies are situated or located that are heavily affected by some of the Green Deal legislations, for example, the car industry. Lise Fuhr, she is Director General of ETNO, an association which is actually the voice of Europe's telecommunication network operators. And Eva Bardikova, she is a policy analyst at the OECD Environment Directorate, and her primary research lies at the intersection of digitalization and the circular economy transition, which will be a big chunk as well of the Green Deal coming later this year. Then we have Luis Neves. He's the CEO of the Global Enabling Sustainability Initiative, GESI, which is a thought leader organization in the field of ICT and sustainability, with a strong focus on the enabling role and positive contribution of digital technologies to climate protection. And last but not least, Sören Giegler from DG Connect will join us in the debate as well. Before we start now, one probably housekeeping remark to our audience following the live stream. You can take part in the discussion by asking questions via Slido. Let's start with you, Vincent, and the elephant in the room. The Commission wants to present the long-awaited Fit for 55 package on Wednesday. Can you give us some insights? What will it entail?
Thank you, Anja, and good afternoon to everyone. Very pleased to attend this event. I think it's a very interesting subject, very timely. You want me to say a few words about the package? It's tricky because its adoption is only on Wednesday, so I will stick to the main line. But perhaps by way of introduction, I would like to say that it's been a very intense period. I mean, to prepare the package, but it started in December 2019 with the adoption of the Green Deal with the new Commission. And last year, you may remember that we had also several strategies on energy system integration, on hydrogen, on offshore renewable energy. And very recently, there was this landmark decision, the climate law, which set into legislation the objective of carbon neutrality by 2050 and set an intermediary target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. 90 emissions. So I think on Wednesday, we'll move one step further. We'll change gear with the adoption of the Fit for 55 package. Will be the most comprehensive set of measures that the Commission has ever presented in the field of climate and energy. I wouldn't call it a tsunami of proposal, as you said in introduction, but it's a very comprehensive set of legislation. As you know, in DG Energy, we've worked very actively in the last months on the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive and the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive. And the package will propose revisions of these two important pieces of legislation in order to increase their targets, of course, in line with the new ambition, but also come up with new measures to generate more renewable energy sources and more energy efficiency gains as well. But that's, of course, not all. The emission trading system will be strengthened and applied to new sectors, and that will generate extra revenues that can be used to alleviate poverty and also stimulate innovation, very important. The effort sharing regulation will also be updated to align the national targets set for each member state with the new ambition. We'll look at transport. I mean, transport is the fastest growing sector in terms of energy use. There are a lot of energy efficiency gains that can be achieved there. There's also a lot of potential to increase the share of renewable fuels in transport. So there will be an announcement on the revision of the CO2 emission standards for new cars and vans. And that will, of course, be a very important change in the Fit for 55, which should lead to a lot of savings. And that should increase also the share of clean vehicles. At the same time, of course, there will be measures to increase the uptake of cleaner transport fuels. And we will also be we've been working on taxation, and we'll propose to adapt the energy taxation to our new climate goals, and to offer as well a mechanism to limit carbon leakage, which is a risk. So there's also a proposal along that line. And finally, it's also about the working to increase the nature's capacity to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So there will be also measures proposed in this area. But that package won't be the end of the journey. Towards the end of the year, it's also foreseen to propose a revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and colleagues in DG Energy are working on it as an impact assessment, like for the other pieces of legislation that has been undertaken to look at different options. And normally, towards the end of the year, there should be the adoption by the Commission of the revised directive. We're also working very hard on a gas decarbonization package, which will also be ready towards the end of the year, and also measures to reduce methane emissions. So that's a very busy agenda, but as I said, the adoption on Wednesday of the package will already be a very important milestone. And of course, then we will enter into the political negotiations of the various files, and support from the Parliament will be instrumental, as well as the support from the Council. But I think the Parliament is very prepared to discuss this proposal. So I think that's an agenda that will remain busy for quite some time, and then will come, of course, the implementation and making sure that all these directives get implemented properly by the member states. So in a nutshell, without taking too long, that's what I can tell you about the Fit for 55 package, and it's more a teaser than a comprehensive explanation of its content, but you will understand that 2 days before the adoption, there's not much more that one could say.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think, well, the car industry would like to know whether there will be a ban on the combustion engine by 35 or what the new renewable target is going to be. So I understand that you don't dive into the figures, but maybe just one more sentence on which role is ICT going to play in this package? Maybe in the energy efficiency part regarding data centers, maybe you can say a few words on that one.
Yeah, well, ICTs are, I mean, as it was said by Soren, a fantastic enabler for the green transition, to the point that we speak more and more about the twin green and digital transition. I think it's not a new subject, I agree, but I can see it from the Commission side that this is becoming a much discussed topic. And as it was said already, the ICTs represent a non-negligible share of our energy consumption, around 10% of the electricity that we use in Europe. There's a number of solutions to reduce this energy demand. For instance, using more energy efficient cooling systems, reusing the heat emitted by data centers. If I only focus on data centers. Using renewable energy sources also to supply electricity to these data centers, building some of them in cold regions so that we reduce the need for heating, but also using green procurement criteria, which also is a way to foster the development of new data centers that are highly efficient, but also comply with other sustainability criteria, not only energy, but also when it comes to the use of water, for instance. And the revised directive on energy efficiency has looked into these things. I mean, during the impact assessment, there were different options that were looked at, and the idea will be to look at the energy efficiency of data center through, for instance, the use of public procurement. This is a very powerful tool. I mean, public procurement in Europe is about 16% of the GDP. I mean, it's a very large purchasing power, and there's a scope for the public authorities to lead by example, and on the basis, of course, of the green public procurement criteria. But the directive will also look at the what can be done with the part of the directive that deal with heating and cooling, and what can be done in particular to foster the reuse of waste heat. I mean, that's a key phenomenon with data center. A lot of the heat can be wasted unless it is reused for other processes inside or even offsite, looking at other applications, for instance, linking to district heating and cooling. So there's a number of aspects that have been looked at in the framework of the Energy Efficiency Directive revision.
Thank you very much. Markus, I would like to get a little bit more into the political context. Part of the proposal on Wednesday will be a revamp of the EU's emission trading system. We heard about that, and a proposal for carbon border adjustment mechanism to shield Europe's industries from cheaper imports made in places with laxer environmental rules. And these instruments are meant to prevent carbon leakage and ensure that production jobs stay in Europe, especially in energy-intensive sectors like steel or aluminium. But can the Green Deal really be a growth program, as the Commission President puts it, or do we risk that it actually becomes a deindustrialization program for Europe if we don't get it right?
Thank you very much for the question. And the mother of all answers is it belongs. How we fix the systems and how we are able to establish these systems internationally. And therefore, I'm not sharing this enthusiasm, which I have heard from the colleagues from the European Commission, as if we go a little bit in the details, I think we are not dealing serious with ourselves. Number one, the mother of the idea is to have, at the end of the day, a decarbonized industry. That means there will be no revenues anymore, but there will be still the costs. So to say now, wow, we will redistribute the money and solve the energy poverty and solve social gap and whatever, sorry, that will not work, because at the end of the process, we still have the costs, but we have no revenues anymore. So therefore, I think we are lying to ourselves. Number two, the CBAM. Can we really ask the industry outside Europe to pay additional tariffs? I think it's more a tariff than a tax, but we will see what the Commission is going to propose. If we distribute for free the pollution rights to our industry. Is that really then readjusting costs where no costs have been created because we distributed the rights for emissions for free? If I would be a third country, I would put that on the table and, and ask this question. So seriously, as Parliament asked the Commission to deliver a WTO-compatible system, that will be one of the key challenges to address that, to be WTO compatible and to have a balanced approach, which at the end of the day delivers a mechanism which is really acceptable. And of course, for our exporting industry, it will be a challenge as well, as no one will say, well, we understand that Europe wants to save the planet. That's why we have to pay something like a tariff. But of course, the Europeans are allowed to deliver their products in the future without any other requirements. So that's why I think we really have to make ourselves more realistic what's coming up. And the last thing, as we speak about revenues, I have the feeling this money is already distributed more than once on national level, on European level, in European level even more than once. Parliament asked for own resources for refinancing the RRF, for example. Member states are spending the money already. Germany has introduced already a second ETS for transport, and we are paying that with every visit at a gasoline station. Is it then covered by the European ETS or not? And what is then with revenues again, or as Germany is spending them already? Only to give you some of these detail when I speak about this area, costs and taking part of the financial part. And the other thing, of course, is my understanding of technology neutrality is maybe a little bit different than what we will get from the European Commission. And being an engineer, you spoke about my education skills. I think, of course, and it was said very, very clearly by Søren, that we need these technologies, but then we have to give the industry the chance to develop these technologies, and that means we really have to be technology neutral. Otherwise, we will fail this issue as well. It's not a question whether I'm in favor or against electrical mobility or traditional mobility. That's not the question at the end of the day. It has to be carbon neutral. And that is what we have to achieve. But are we really able to use synergies? Are we aware of interconnectivities between various fields of industry? And are we really in the way that electric cars versus combustion engines, use of alternative fuels, what's about producing the electricity in the car? There are a lot of possibilities. We are not discussing at the moment, and therefore, if we start to declare one technology is a good one and other technologies are bad ones, and that is what I really often hear in the European Parliament, then we will fail. And then, of course, we will have these problems which you asked in your question, Anja, that we will not create growth, but we will create growth somewhere else outside European Union, and only to transfer money to solve the social problems occurring out of that. Sorry, that is not a political approach which is in the center of my political understanding. So therefore, we have to do everything which really creates new business models, new possibilities for our businesses. Then we are on the right track. And if we start only banning and pricing, then we will remove a lot of industries far away from European Union. And to find an approach which addresses the possibilities and reduces the risks is hopefully what is discussed at the moment. As I got notice, HEPTO is still working, so the chef de cabinet is still in the meeting for preparation on the Wednesday commissioner meetings. And my understanding is that even the the Hebdo, this weekly meeting of the chef de cabinet, will not solve all the problems and leave something for the commissioners. So I think it will really be finalized on Wednesday, and therefore that shows that even on commission level, not everyone is as convinced as on this general frame as we got it described now to be adopted on Wednesday. So therefore, that is one of the big challenges. And the next issue is, of course, how can we introduce our American friends? Yes or no? So if I follow what Biden said, no pricing for CO2, but using technology as a let's make a deal out of it. That's what he said on World Earth Day. Let's make a deal out of it. And I miss this European approach. Let's make a deal out of it. So I have the feeling we discuss it. Let's make a bureaucratic approach out of it, and then we will fail. And if I go through all these details which have been presented, we lose the attraction for making a deal out of it and go the European way, and we make a bureaucracy out of it, and then we will fail.
Very clear words. Thanks a lot. Considering the more international level, so basically a global problem needs international solutions. We heard that if we go alone with the ETS and other regions price carbon quite differently, and a lot of regions don't at all. The question is, do we need probably an international carbon price? So in that regard, I would like to ask Eva and Lise maybe very quickly on what would be your personal wishes in that regard, or in general for the COP26, because international commitments in terms of targets and maybe carbon pricing will be on the agenda in Glasgow. Maybe Eva first.
Thank you, Anja. So just really very quickly, I mean, it is obvious that addressing the climate change is basically a global challenge, and it requires a global leadership and also an international cooperation. And we have seen a lot of good things happening on this end. We have seen more and more countries that were already subscribing or committing to the net zero emissions. We have seen many thousands of investments that were committing, and we have also seen that there were different levels of governments and also top-down leadership that has been committed to this topic. We have also seen that the transport and the energy sectors have been moving more towards this direction. But what we need to move a bit faster in order to be able to implement more credible pathways towards net zero transition, and countries need to follow through their commitments. So challenges, there seem to be challenges typically around how they are moving actually from the commitment to the outcomes. And we have seen, or we are seeing, that the current policies in more of the short term are being insufficient in order to meet the global commitments. We are seeing it on the CO2 emissions that are steadily increasing, and we are seeing how we are potentially falling back to the pre-COVID level. So what is very important, what I wanted to emphasize here, is that there's a strong need for very clear and precise monitoring of the climate action. And this would, on the one hand, help to track the action, and on the other hand, also to track the or encourage stepping up the ambitions by countries. So that's one thing. The second thing is obviously talking about COVID, and in the aftermath of COVID, it's very important to reframe the climate change and the response of climate change, and also to make sure that the COVID responses by the countries, the economic packages, are very much in line with the climate change stakes. We have seen, for example, at the OECD, we have recently launched Green Recovery Database, where we looked at 43 countries, and we have seen that less, so this was before the RRP packages, but we have seen that less than 1/5 of all the investments, green recovery investments, were actually green, and we have seen that the exact same number was actually had mixed or negative impacts. So this is very important to make sure that we understand that the recovery packages, what is their impact on the climate action.
Lisa, what would you like to see at the climate conference in Glasgow?
Well, thank you, Anja. I think we heard Søren say that the green discussion has been a discussion in Europe for a long time, and I agree. So I think COP26 will be an important moment for Europe to actually assert its values, and we have been leaders, as I say, for a long time. So we should seize the moment to work with the new US administration to work more intensively on the climate field. I think this is not a problem we can solve alone. We need to make it a joint responsibility. And I think in addition to all of this, of course, digitalization needs to be at the core of all the discussions, because these are proven to be enablers and also part of the solution in many ways. So I think we need to go into look at what digital tools can we use to actually slash the carbon emission. And just to give you a very quick number, because I know we're short on time, we had a report made that if we had full fiber, full 5G, we would actually be able to cut carbon emission with 15% in Europe. But that needs an investment of 300 billion euros. So that's another story. But we have opportunities. We just need to find a way to enable them and seize them.
Very good. We want to dive in that one later on as well, the ICT aspect. I would like to do one more round on the political context and on China with Luis. With the Green Deal, Europe claims global leadership and wants to become the first climate neutral continent. But in how far is a climate debate also a geopolitical debate about Europe's position on the world stage and the competition with the US and China? I just want to quote the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He said, "We need to lead the renewable energy revolution to win the long-term strategic competition with China." So what's your take on that one, Luis?
Well, Anja, thank you so much, first of all, to Deutsche Telekom for the invitation. Well, as you know, Jesse and myself, we are not, let's say, the ones that are really engaged into policy discussions. We are more on the advocacy side of the conversation. So the policy side is more to my colleague here, Liz Fuhr from ETNO. She is more into those types of discussions. I look at it from, let's say, from what I would say a citizen perspective, also, of course, taking responsibilities for leading a business organization. We need to understand that we live in a very complex world, and all the three blocks, they want to live. When it comes to leadership, any of the blocks wants to live. The question is, how do you really ensure leadership? And I see an opportunity for Europe to lead with the Green Deal. But the Green Deal really needs to be taken in a very serious way. And it cannot be achieved by the amount of money that has been announced. It has to be much more than that. It requires much more than that. The other thing is that if we are willing to lead, we need to understand that the announcement, and this is my personal perspective, I would like to stress it, that reducing carbon emissions by 55% by 2030 is not enough. I can well imagine the Commission in 3 years' time revising this statement. And I would like us to reflect on something that I was reading today, and that is about an IPCC report that just came a few weeks ago outside. And this report warned of a series of thresholds beyond which recovery from climate breakdown may become impossible. The report warns that life on Earth can recover from a drastic climate shift by evolving into new species and creating new ecosystems. But humans cannot. So leading scientists also warn that billions of people are at risk of chronic water scarcity, tens of millions exposed to hunger, and places near to the equator will experience unsurvivable heat unless steps are taken to build up defenses against climate shocks and cut emissions fast. And so why am I talking about this? Because this is a global problem. And so we need all to understand that when we are talking about climate, we need to understand what are the solutions to address the climate change impacts. And if you look at technology, we know that technology can really support to address climate change. Today, I was working with the different associations, Ethno Digital Europe and Digital SME Alliance and GSMA, on responding to the proposal of the Commission on the European Green Deal coalition that Jesse will be leading in terms of the associations together with all the others. And we were looking at the number of reports that we have that clearly show that technology will be fundamental to respond to climate change. So that's not the problem. We have enough evidence. The problem is, how are we going really to establish the necessary steps that respond to this? And those steps, they need to come together. And that's why we launched the Digital with Purpose movement that someone spoke about a couple of minutes ago. Because only companies by themselves alone, setting up their targets, that will not solve the problem. We need three fundamental things, from my perspective, for Europe to lead, or any other, let's say, political bloc to lead. I think the one that will step first will lead. We need three fundamental things to take the lead. The first one is related to the purpose. So the company's business, they need to revise their purpose. And revising their purpose is doing something that I love to hear from Birgit Lasper. It's about how companies embed sustainability in their core business. That's a fundamental step. So companies really need to understand that sustainability will be the key driver of a changing world in the future. The second step is about companies stepping up on their own responsibility, because we are talking about climate change, but climate change has many different components. It has supply chain impacts, it has circular economy impacts, it has other impacts that we are missing in this conversation around privacy, security, ethical standards, and so on. And we need to understand also that with technological developments, we are creating a much bigger digital divide as well. So we need to address those. And finally, we need to use the enabling capacity of the technologies. It's about innovation for sustainability. It's about developing the solutions that really help companies and help business to move forward. So coming back to your discussion, the block that will really embraces these three components from my perspective will be the one that will be leading, because the studies that we have, they show the value of those actions and those innovations. So if we think about Smarter 2030 reporting that we have done in 2015, we're talking about 11 trillion euros of benefit for the companies. So the benefit is there. The question is, how are we really realizing that benefit? And we are not making it. And finally, an important thing is that we need to measure what is going on, because we cannot continue to live on promises. It does not make sense. So if you look to the outside world, you see a company like Amazon and says, well, I will be planting 1 billion trees. Great news. They are in all newspapers. And then on the following day, you read that Amazon in Ireland destroyed 130 tons of new materials returned by the customers because it was cheaper than recycle them. So these things, they do not match. So we need a serious conversation in Europe. I think that we have an opportunity, and I think the European Green Deal, and I'm not involved on politics, there probably are many things that I do not control or understand, but from my experience in 20 years of working in this sustainability area, my understanding is that every single thing we touch with the sustainability mindset, we make money out of it. And Deutsche Telekom has good examples, and Birgit could announce many of them outside of those that you already mentioned. You know, more efficient networks, you know, being more efficient in the car fleet, a circular economy approach, all those things bring value and create a society where all of us, we can live in the future, because this is, I think, the main objective that we are talking about here. This is not about making money. This is about ensuring that the planet will be living in good shape in a couple of years' time. It's about climate justice at the end of the day as well. So we need to ensure that future generations will be living in this planet, and we need to move away from the money conversation to the sustainability conversation. Because if we are innovating, we will be making the money, and the money will appear automatically. And if we take that approach, we will be developing the solutions where Europe will be taking the leadership in relation both to the United States and China.
Thank you very much, Luis. Sören, I would like to come back to what you said a little bit earlier, because that ties nicely into what our audience wants to know. I stick a little bit to China, but in the context of technology. So China is a big emitter. So basically the greenhouse gas emissions exceed those of all other developed countries combined, mostly due to coal-fired power plants. At the same time, China is the world's largest producer and exporter of solar panels, wind turbines, electric car batteries, and holds a lot of patents on the world's renewable energy sources or technologies. So does the EU actually risk to fall behind in clean technologies? And we will have the same debate we have on digital sovereignty in the clean tech field. So, and our audience wants to know, because you elaborated on this already in the beginning, how can the EU foster industry leadership in clean technologies while preventing carbon leakage for imported materials and energy sources? You mentioned already a little bit the funding opportunities, but probably you could dive into this a little bit deeper.
Well, thank you so much. I think what is critical, as I wanted to add what Luis and also Marcus said. So we strongly believe in a human-centered approach to the digital and green transformation. This is really important. It's about people. It's about living conditions, about well-being. When we measure economic growth, there are now different ways of measurement which are much more holistic. So basically we follow Amartya Sen's approach of a well-being approach. It's not only about consumption and income. It is, of course, critical aspect, but we also need to fully incorporate sustainability and human well-being into what we measure. So here, by concretely, yes, it is true that China is investing heavily in renewable energy. I myself worked on solar panel projects like 15 years ago, where we used to be leading in Europe. So what we think would be needed in Europe is, I think what Marcus also mentioned, is public-private partnerships. So coming together, public-private, because let's be honest, the public sector, the challenge is too big. No single actor in society can address this anymore. So the public investments will be never sufficient. That's why we are very keen to work with the private sector on this. And I can give you a concrete example. We have actually done a small program, okay? But I can give you a concrete example. We have created the first investment fund for artificial intelligence and blockchain in Europe. We had not so much resources for the first phase. So we had 100 million euros provided by the European Commission, and then have very closely worked with the partners from the EIB and EIF to actually crowd in 900 million from private investors. So we created around 1.1 billion in euros, 1.1 billion euros investments, but through partnerships with venture capitalists and the private sector towards a common goal. And this type of approach, I think we need to take in clean tech as well. And I would go further on the intersection of digital and clean tech. Because now at this moment, the standards are being set. That's the other very important issue, similar to 5G. Yeah. So we have the issue that 4G, we were not leading, right? Now we are talking 5G, we're talking 6G. So it's also about, do we want to wake up, Luis mentioned it, ethical concerns, data protection, digital citizen rights. Do we really all want to use Chinese technology, IoT type of devices, clean tech leadership? Because this is a revolution. And I want to come back to Marcus's point, and there with all due respect, I personally disagree. Yeah, because I think we have to lead in innovation. Innovation is not just a cost. It makes us more competitive. And if we do not invest today in the clean tech revolution, we will face a similar situation like we face today with the network economy, where we are unfortunately depending on particularly US networks and have now the digital sovereignty issues, right? Or you mentioned Amazon Web Services, that cloud computing, we all know the market is dominated by non-European actors. So similar, this could be the case in 10 years with clean tech. And then we are the ones who've been, as Lisa said, talking and thought leaders in this area. But unfortunately, I don't know, this is a personal opinion, okay, I'm sorry. We don't commercialize. We are very great in innovating. We have the best thinkers. We just looked it up. Luis talked about the papers. We have, for instance, in Europe, fantastic think tanks, yeah, on digital and clean. But we don't have enough entrepreneurship and not enough of the scale up. Like, I don't know, I can mention one concrete example, UiPath, a fantastic startup in Romania, yeah, was unable to raise funding in Europe and raised $2 billion, okay? $2 billion in New York, and went public on the New York Stock Exchange, and as a consequence, resettled all of its company to New York. Today, 45% of companies, startups in Europe are seriously considering to resettle in the clean tech area because of the lack of finance.
Very interesting. Thank you. Before we come to the ICT sector's contribution, in more detail on the network side, I would like to turn to Vincent again on the renewable energy thing, because basically decarbonizing the energy sector is one big chunk of the whole exercise. So first of all, the Fit for 55 package will definitely increase the share of renewables in Europe, and the availability of enough renewable energy sources at a reasonable price will be a crucial factor for a successful green transition. So how competitive are we in that regard in Europe? And what potential do you see for digital solutions in the energy sector?
Yeah, thank you, Anja. I think one thing I could say in introduction is that the clean energy technologies perform better than the conventional energy sector in terms of value added, in terms of labor productivity, in terms of employment growth. And our competitiveness depends, of course, on the technologies. So you mentioned PV and the fact that we have lost a market share in this area. This is true, but the EU industry holds a very strong position in some of the clean energy technologies that have the potential to be scaled up over the coming years. I think, for instance, that about 93% of the offshore capacity that is installed in Europe is produced locally by European manufacturers. We also have a very strong competitive position in onshore wind, for instance, where the large scale of the market and the increasing capacity outside Europe offer very promising prospects. And the researchers that we have in these sectors, the companies that we have in Europe are leading players in the whole value chain to develop digital technologies like for sensing, monitoring system, for onshore wind turbines, and they are market leaders. If I take ocean energy, it's the same. We are a global leader for developing new technologies, mainly wave and tidal. We hold 66% of patents in tidal and 44% of patents worldwide in wave energy. And 70% of the global ocean energy capacity has been developed by companies based in Europe. But so we need to boost that competitiveness. I want to cast a positive light on this, but we need to support research and innovation. And I'm very happy that about a month ago, we had the adoption of the first work program of Horizon Europe, and we will support this kind of technologies. I fully agree with Marcus that they need support. They also need support for moving from innovation to commercialization. I think that that's a very important step, which we should encourage and support further. But in InvestEU, we've got these new windows on research, innovation, and digitization. We hope that this will help. In Horizon Europe, we've developed this European Innovation Council to help companies, in particular small and medium-sized enterprises, breach the valley of death, as we call it. And this should be a novelty in the next multi-annual financial framework, and that should help. And we also need, at the same time, to improve the market conditions, of course, and make sure that we develop measures along the line of the new industrial strategy, along the line of the new Fit for 55 package. At the same time, because you mentioned dependencies earlier on, and you talked about China, I think I would like to mention that we need to be very mindful at the same time about our dependency on raw materials. Many renewable technologies require raw materials, which today are only produced by a handful of countries. I mean, you mentioned China earlier. They produce over 80% of rare earth for permanent magnet generators that we use in wind energy and electromobility. So we have to address this issue, and this is why the Commission adopted last September an action plan on critical raw materials. It put forward a number of concrete actions to tackle these vulnerabilities in the raw materials sector, and to bring together stakeholders. We've created in September last year the European Raw Materials Alliance. So that's an issue which is being tackled very seriously at European level, because we don't want to move from a dependence on fossil fuels to a dependence on raw materials. So we have to address this issue. That's a very important one. Now, to answer the second part of your question briefly on the potential, I think you asked me about the potential for digital solutions in the energy sector, and the potential is great. I mean, there's a lot of benefits. It's really obvious that we can get gains for each and every component of the energy system, from the supply of energy to the demand side. On the supply side, we've supported numerous projects that have very clearly demonstrated that digital technologies can optimize the production of renewables, from, for instance, predictive maintenance of offshore wind turbines, to the fast detection and localization of problems in the electricity networks. On the demand side, of course, needless to say, digitization brings a lot of benefits too. I think several speakers have emphasized the need to help consumers become active in the energy transition. I think this is absolutely true, and I think the ICT solutions can help in this regard. We've supported many projects also in the Horizon program that have shown that we could, through the help of apps or other tools, better engage, better empower the consumers in the energy transition. The building sector also, I don't remember who mentioned this, but it's one area where also we have great examples of how ICT and digitalization brings more and more benefits. I mean, not only for the construction of new buildings, but also for the renovation of buildings. And that we've seen a lot of flagship projects being developed in this area. But if I've got one more minute, I would like to just finish by saying that there's a kind of overarching application which I think is very important for the use of ICT, and this is the use of digital technologies to foster sector integration. Digital solutions can offer a great deal of flexibility by better linking distributed generation, renewable generation, the smart grids, the energy using equipment, for example, connected appliances, and storage. For example, electric cars, heat pumps, freezers that people have in their homes. And all this, however, implies to improve the interoperability and the sharing of data. That is a very important point if we want to stimulate energy system integration, if we want to use ICT to create flexibility in the energy system. And if we want as well to use this data to create new services and with new market players, not just the transmission system operators, the distribution system operators, the aggregators, but also new players that may enter the market and propose new digital services. I think someone earlier on mentioned the need to rethink the way we look at ICT and think of new business models. And I think in the energy sector that there is this potential to create new business model. But for that, we need also to look at measures to preserve citizens' right, increase their digital skills, address the issue of digital divide. Not everybody is connected the same way in Europe. We need measures to improve data protection, to ensure cybersecurity. And of course, we need to put in place, as we discussed earlier, a measure that reduce the carbon footprint of ICT solutions. But with these measures in place, I think we can reap benefits of digitization. Sorry to be a bit long, but you asked me 2 questions at the same time, so I'm trying to answer them.
I take it on me, no worries. But you gave a good, basically, bridge for me to come actually now to the digital infrastructure and the ICT sector. Lise, digital infrastructure is, on the one hand, a crucial enabler for smart services that help cut CO2 emissions. We talked about this. On the other hand, and Vincent just mentioned it, growing data traffic has a negative impact on the carbon footprint of the ICT sector itself. So are your member companies more a part of the problem or part of the solution when it comes to mitigating climate change and reaching the Green Deal targets?
I think when you look at infrastructure, they are both a part of the problem and an enabler, so both sides. So what I see is that we've heard also Birgit tell about how Deutsche Telekom is taking a lot of initiatives using renewable energy. So if you go that way and look at your network and your own consumption, there you can actually eliminate one factor of the carbon emission problem. And I see our members have done that to a great extent. They have actually cut down. We have some members who are carbon neutral already this year. So that's one part of it. On the other hand, we see that our services, our networks are enabling other industries to also cut their carbon emission. So whenever you look at anything related to greening the society in Europe, you need to look at both parts. You need to look at the networks and you need to look at the enabling potential. And saying that, you also need to look at the whole value chain. So we as operators are, of course, responsible for our networks, but we need the vendors, we need the services that we also use to be equally dependent or equally responsible for greening their parts, because we buy hardware from vendors and that needs to also comply with being green. So this is part of a big value chain. So I think policy and regulation needs to help both sides when we look at this. As I said in the beginning, if we actually have a full 5G, if we have full fiber, we can bring down carbon emission 15%, but that needs a huge investment. So if you don't enable that investment, you're not enabling other industries to become greener. So you need to see this in cohesion. You need to work with this in a way where you take all parts into account. So an investment-friendly policy for the infrastructure is key. So, and that could be linked again to requirements also to other users. So I think we all have our responsibility. We need to take every part into account. And I think Markus mentioned it. You need to also have a business case to actually speed this up. It doesn't come from nothing. When you have infrastructure, that comes with a cost. It comes with a cost of digging, of spectrum, of all the other a bit more boring things. But I see good tendencies. I think if you look at what the Commission sent out with the code, that was a good intention of being investment friendly. But now we need the member states to help us all comply with becoming more investment friendly, and then help the green transition. Because as you said, we have the twin transition, it's digital and it's green, and they need to go hand in hand.
What would be when the upcoming revision of the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive, for example, is meant to speed up a little bit the basically European-wide rollout of 5G and FTTH, and both are considered the most efficient network generations, especially when it comes to growing data traffic. So Sören from DG Connect is here. What would be your wish to the European Commission? What would help the sector to speed up the rollout of efficient or green networks?
I actually think the Broadband Cost Reduction Directive is a very good tool, but it takes time to implement in the member states. So they need to help us put pressure on the member states to actually implement these things faster. And again, all related to cost in regards of infrastructure deployment is super important when we talk about the green transition. So help us convince the member states that this is actually for common good and for other industries good. And in the end, it's the end users who benefit from all of this.
Maybe if I may, the only remark I wanted to say
Yes.
is so important, the adoption of the technologies across particularly also small businesses and across society. So we have done a lot of work, and which shows that still, traditional business, we call this digitizing the shoemaker. Maybe a little overdrawn statement, but that is the key issue. We are very advanced in Europe when it comes to robotics, Industry 4.0. The industry has really benefited from digitalization, but once you go to the SME, to like literally the shoemaker or e-commerce platforms, is very underutilized. And the other aspect is our DESI, Digital Economy Society Index, shows clearly the growing digital divide within Europe. So the regions, it's very different. I mean, we always talk about Europe as an entity, but it's so different if we're in Finland than when we are in Greece or in Italy or in Germany. So basically what is also really critical, that we support a common European approach and that we support the weaker regions within Europe with the digitalization and the rollout of broadband. So we created this broadband fund for that region in rural areas. There's still plenty of regions, rural areas, which don't have access to broadband in Europe.
And let me add to this, because I completely agree with Søren here. We need also demand side targets that can actually help implement the technology that will help us become greener. But again, all incentives needs to be made in a way so you're not creating a barrier. You need to incentivize the industries in a way so you actually create greater uptakes, more rollout, and vice versa, instead of creating too stringent rules that that actually might put a lower threshold, a lower baseline than what the companies are already doing.
Thank you so much. I would like to go via Luis then to the circular economy, because Eva is waiting for her topic, I think. But Luis, before we go to the circular economy, how can we make sure that the enablement factor of ICT is maximized to achieve the Green Deal targets? You talked about measurement. You're going to lead the Green Digital Coalition that is trying to standardize this enablement factor to implement it into laws. So where is the biggest potential, and what needs to be done to maximize it politically? Oops, did we lose you, or are you on mute? I don't hear anything.
I'm unmuting right now.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you for the question. I would like to take a step back just to explain that I do not need too many arguments to explain how to let's say, increase the potential. So we did 3 reports in GSE about enabling, one in 2008, another one in 2012, another one in 2015. The difference between them is between an enabling potential of 5% to 20% in 7 years. And that enabling potential is also connected with business value. We're talking about from 1.9 trillion to 11 trillion. And so I said in GSE, I'm not going to do any more reports. It makes no sense. Every single report that we do, we have the potential, we have the numbers, we have the figures. We did recently the Digital with Purpose report again with huge figures about the impact of digital technologies. So digital technologies can impact 22% of the Sustainable Development Goals in a positive manner and reduce the downtrend of 23% of them. So we need to move away from this conversation on the evidence. And to be honest, we have enough, let's say, figures to support the conversation. And when it comes to our own footprinting, we also need to understand that we are probably taking a wrong conversation here. We need investment on digital. And if we invest on digital, of course, we need more energy. And what's up? We need more energy, because if we need more energy, if we invest more, we get more money. We make more money and we make the world greener, because we have the figures that explain that every time that we are increasing investment on technology, we are increasing the enabling impact of technology by a different figure and a different factor. So we should not focus ourselves, of course, in the sense that we should strive for reducing energy consumption. It's important, but we should not hinder policy making because of that conversation, because it's the wrong conversation. It's leading us in the wrong direction. So we really need to invest on digital. We need measures, we need policy to make sure that we digitalize Europe, because that's the way of making Europe being the leader in the world. And within the digital coalition, the role of GSE and the associations is only about to determine how are we going to measure that enabling impact, because right now we are measuring it in many different manners. So we need a common approach. I think it's important. It's also important from a carbon tax perspective. So if we prove that digital technologies can enable other industry sectors to become more efficient, we can make money out of the enabling impact as well if we have a standard. So, and that's why, and I think it was Liz that mentioned that in relation to COP26, we need to bring the digital conversation to the climate discussions, because it doesn't exist. You know, you have COP meetings talking about heavy energy sectors, but you don't listen anything about the digital world. So everything is upside down to some extent. There are 2 fundamental sectors from my perspective to lead the way for a low carbon economy. It's the digital and the power sector. In both these sectors, they need each other. Digital needs power, and power, green power, and the power needs digital, because, by the way, power companies now, maybe 30 or 40% of their infrastructure is digital. I was talking with Iberdrola the other day. They have 40% of their staff now working on digital because of renewables, implementation of smart grids, smart metering, and all of that. So the world is going digital. We have 65% of the world economy becoming digital, and this will increase. So we should not be ashamed. We need to promote digital. We need to invest on digital, and that's the way that Europe will be leading. Invest, put money, and then all the rest will come after that.
Okay, so I'm a little bit mindful of time here. So I think Eva has definitely the word now, and I think Lisa has to leave at 6:30. So what I would suggest that Eva can talk about circular economy and the importance to reach the climate targets right now. And then I will actually hand it over to Markus to wrap it up a little bit from a political point of view. And if the Commission, Vincent, if you two can stay on, actually, still that would be helpful to have a little sort of conclusion or concluding remarks of you all. So then we hopefully can end a little bit after time, but still okay. So Eva, it's up to you. I think the Commission as well gives the circular economy a really big, a huge importance to reach the Green Deal targets, because otherwise they won't get there. And I think you did a lot of research on this. So what is the role of the circular economy for the green transition?
Thank you, Anja, for the floor, and thanks also to Luis. I would maybe add, you were talking about the digital and the power. I would probably add into your equation also resources, because they are probably very equally important. In fact, we talk very often about the climate change and the energy, but knowing that the greenhouse gas emissions have been projected to more than double by 2060, at the same time, we also know that the current climate package is only going to cover about 1/2 of the CO2 or the net zero emissions that have been committed to in the Paris Climate Agreement. And so we also need to look at the other side of the story, and we need to look beyond these policies in order to be able to cover up with the second half. And this is where the resources are coming up, because in fact, there's growing population and we have higher living standards. People are purchasing more, industries are producing more, and they are using more resources. And the resource use is eventually having greater environmental externalities, and which also include the climate change relevant topic. So just to put it into perspective, according to our estimates or projections, by 2060, or actually already now, the share of the greenhouse gas emissions which are directly or indirectly related to materials is 2/3. This specifically means materials management. So either it's agricultural production, we're talking about construction, we're talking about manufacturing, but we're also, of course, talking about the combustion of the fossil fuels for the energy. And so we show that this increase is going to be about 50% gigatons by 2060. And of this, about 12%, only 12% is going to be due to cement, and another 12% due to 7 other materials or 7 other key metals. So in order to improve the material efficiency, the material efficiency eventually can help to narrow this gap that I'm talking about between the current, the CO2 commitments and those that are needed to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement. And circular economy as a paradigm change is very much affecting the shift in the production and in the consumption. And it's been high on the political agendas over the past at least a decade, whether G7, G20. It's also part of the EU Green Deal for its decoupling of the economic growth from the resource use and being climate neutral. And at the OECD, we've done a lot of research on many different topics. We've been looking at the macroeconomic impacts. We've been looking at the circular economy and trade. We've been looking at different materials. We've issued resource efficiency guidance. We've been looking at some instruments. Maybe 2 reports I would like to highlight here as a recent report on circular business models. That is from a year and a half ago, and a forthcoming report that's looking at the digitalization, which is facilitating the circular economy transition. Now, why are these 2 topics important? First of all, we have the circular business models, and these being already mentioned. Birgit has mentioned durability and repairability. So this is an example of some of the circular business models. They are actually using the existing materials or reused materials and the products, and they are using them for the creation of their value added. And then thereby they are decreasing the environmental footprint that is eventually considerably smaller than in case of the traditional business models. So it is eventually through models like repair, reuse, so extending the use life and the dematerialization of the services due to different marketing activities that is helping also to decrease the greenhouse gas emissions. from the raw materials used. And then the second topic that we are looking at is basically the digitalization, and that's something that Søren's been talking about, give digitalization a purpose at the very beginning. So eventually digitalization has disruptive effects for the consumer behavior, for the producers, and for the whole economy. And we've been in our report looking at different type of technologies and their combinatorial power. I'm talking about the IoT, I'm talking about the AI, blockchain, cloud computing, and how these can facilitate the circular business models. And in fact, what digital technologies do, they make the assets more intelligent. They generate information flows, they generate data about the products, the materials, the components, their recycling, their handling. And by that, they are helping to keep these products longer in the system. So they are helping to solve thereby some of the information asymmetries. So we don't know, and somebody was already talking about the traceability, we don't know where the product or the material is coming from, or what is it composed of. So the case of the digital passportization in the construction, but also of RFID tags for tracking the waste, so for easier waste handling, and then also the transaction cost, so matching the producers and the consumers better. I'm thinking here of the sharing models, but also about the collaborative consumptions. We've been talking about energy, so for example, smart contracts, which are enabling feeding in the renewable energy into the grid. So this is just a couple of examples. There are a whole lot of examples that are out there. And what is important to say is, of course, there are some negative externalities to these, whether this is environmental rebound effects or the issues that were discussed here before, the data privacy, and the sharing of the data, but also some of the social impacts on the job market. So it is very important to be careful when devising policies and the policy framework for facilitating the transition to what I would call digital circular business models.
Thank you very much. So now I have to be a very strict moderator. So I would ask Markus to do the political wrap up for our whole debate.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was a little bit surprised now. Firstly, we are out of the time. I had to listen a lot of things where I disagree and had no chance to come in and to say it very clear in short words. To use European taxpayers' money and to buy the hardware from China and the software from the United States and put the European data protection on top of that is no business model. Sorry, we will fail, even in the digitalization, if we work like that. Honestly, we treat ourselves not as a single market. Where's the single market in telecommunication? We deal Europe as 27 national markets. Our competition rules do not create a European environment which makes our companies strong to compete with other markets. We look only in this small European world. That will not work. And therefore, if we really want to achieve something, we have to adopt a lot of things on a European level, really to create an environment that our companies are able to compete with the Chinese on the hardware, with the US on the software side. And that will not work if we treat Europe as 27 national markets with national regulations, national authorities, and a little bit of taking control from the European side. I'm really disappointed that Europe is not learning this lesson. I have more than once had a discussion with Margaret Vestager on this issue. The next step is, of course, public procurement. So if I speak with Mr. Höttges from Deutsche Telekom, he says, of course, sorry, I'm not the Red Cross. I go to the market. I'm not a producer of antennas. I'm a user of antennas. So I go to the market and ask the market who is delivering for the lowest cost the quality I need. Is that the European approach? And then we blame ourselves that others are more competitive than the European producers have been in the past. So when I started studying engineering, 90% of antennas have been produced in Europe. Now, if I walk through Europe, 90% of the antennas are produced in China. What happened in this 40 years? I don't think that our engineers have become lazy and the Chinese become better. No, we only said, oh, let's do it by the market. Let's do it by the market. But that are the questions we have to answer. And that is my main problem. What we will get on Wednesday as well, and I said it very clearly, is a lot of how to organize things, but not how to enable. And the truth is, those techniques which have not been invented will not be available to solve the problem to be carbon neutral in 2050. We cannot wait for the idea. It is technology which we know already, otherwise we will not achieve this target. And therefore, of course, we have to concentrate what is possible, but we should enable, give the companies the chance, give the SMEs the chance, and do not overregulate them. And that is my main concern at the moment, that we invent a lot of nice things, which at the end create only this European approach, bureaucracy, agencies on European level taking care, but not creating the competitive environment to enable our companies to deliver the services and to compete on global level. It's not the question that a Luxembourgian company can compete with a Maltese company. That's not the world market. Sorry that I do not want to blame Malta or Luxembourg, but to give you an idea. And therefore, we really have to rethink what is the single market project, especially in digitalization. Are we only the users, or are we as well the inventors and producers? And if we will not learn this lesson, we can not afford neither our social model nor our wealth, honestly, because then we will be the users for things produced all over the world, but not in Europe anymore. And that will never run economy as we are used to. So sorry for being so harsh, but as I have only limited time now, I had to wrap up my ideas. Thank you very much.
Perfect. This was very clear. And basically, I give one of my two commissioned guests now the chance to wrap it up completely before I say goodbye, because then we are already 50 minutes over time. Maybe, Sören, you could elaborate on the circular economy aspect and just say a little bit, what are you actually planning? I know that you have reuse, recyclability, all these right to repair. So maybe to give some keywords of what's coming up there, and how do you see the consumer and the circular economy part, and then probably react to Markus to wrap it up for today.
Well, thank you so much. So on circular economy, we plan, of course, the circular electronics initiative, and we work closely with our colleagues on the circularity, product passport, and related issues. But I think that's really a whole new discussion. Now, I think what come out of this discussion is that innovation matters, entrepreneurship matters, the frontier, that we basically enable, as Markus said, the innovators to take this technology to its full potential. And I think what Louis stressed so much, we have enough evidence, we have the data, we now need to implement it. So I think that is really critical. So the message should be very clear, to work together between the different actors to actually implement digital clean tech solutions. The time is now. We cannot wait for others to do it. Otherwise, we run into the same issue which Markus just mentioned, that then other market players are taking over the market. So it's now to be innovative, competitive, take some risks, and invest. Thank you.
Perfect. I couldn't have said that any better. So thank you very much to all of my panelists, to the keynote speakers, Birgit, and thank you very much to the audience. I'm very sorry that we couldn't take all questions now. Time went much faster than I thought. So I hope you found the debate pretty interesting. I did, and hope to see you next time again. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.